Jazz is sort of imprinted on my soul. I didn't ask for that. In fact, I spent most of my life trying to not play jazz, despite the fact that I had plenty exposure to it as a child, both at home and in school. Both my parents were jazz listeners, jazz lovers, and my grandparents, both of them were jazz musicians. My mother's father, John Shackelford, he had his own jazz combo. He played the keys, and my grandma, Gigi, Barbara Shackelford, she did all the vocals. Gigi was a singer for the USO, and so she sang for the troops. And she grew up in Ontario and in Detroit. She had dual citizenship in Canada as well as the United States. And her father was from Canada. So, needless to say, I didn't really see Gigi very much growing up. And Grandpa died when I was 3 or 4 years old. I never met him. The only memory I have of him is when he was lying in his coffin at his funeral. My mom took me there. I don't remember if my sisters or my brother were there. It was just my mother and I in a church full of a lot of other people, and who were all much taller than me. I was like a midget in a sea of towering giant adults at the time. But my mom went up to the coffin and she was toting me behind her in hand, and I saw him for the first time just lying there, lifeless. But I knew who he was. I understood who he was. I knew that was my grandfather, my mother's father. He had held me several times as a baby because I've seen pictures of that. But of course, I didn't remember any of that. I don't remember him at all. Mom was crying and someone came over and hugged her. I think it was like my uncle or something. And, you know, the thing about my grandpa is he was the only other musician in the family that ever really pursued an actual career in music and jazz. And so that's one of the only things that makes me feel like I have a connection with him, because even though I never met him, I never, got to meet him face to face, we're both jazz musicians, and that gives me peace. It makes me feel like I, know him, or at least a significant part of him. So piano was the first instrument that I started fooling around with. Um, my mom, Sharon, gave me a toy keyboard, and as a child, and I played around with that like for hours. And I taught myself how to play a few simple tunes on it by ear. Later in life, I got fairly proficient on the piano while I was in college. I might have been a pianist or a jazz pianist if I'd stuck with it, but we couldn't afford piano lessons. And back then, they still had free music in the schools. So I got a free instrument and, free music lessons. And the flute wasn't actually my first choice. I wanted to play the violin. Uh, I remember the day that they had all the kids interested in music or band come down to the cafeteria and sign up for an instrument. And when they finally got to me, all the violins had been taken already. And since I didn't want a big heavy instrument and heavy case to lug around back and forth, I chose the flute. And we were instructed on that same day to simply begin by blowing into the head joint. And I remember the first time that I put my lips to the mouthpiece and pushed my breath through the little hole, I produced a very clear tone, while several other students were struggling to make a sound. So I guess the flute kind of chose me in a way. It came to me very easily, and I quickly learned how to play it and how to read music. In fact, I was the only music student at my elementary school that was later selected to be in the Linwood All City Elementary Band, which was really cool and a privilege because uh, we got to perform around town in the community very often. And we would practice twice a week. So we spent a lot of time out of class, which was nice, doing something fun. And I I remember I played with one of the string ensembles that they had as well. And I got to play second viola parts on flute, so that was cool. And, you know, I, it was great. I had extra time for homework and for classwork, so I didn't miss anything, and that's how I started playing the flute. When my grandma Gigi would come down to visit from Detroit, she would sing to me. She would sing the jazz standards that she sang with the USO, songs like Misty, Sing, 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 and By Mir bist du schön. And she would just sing, and I just listened and listened. I could listen to her for hours. And she had a beautiful voice, and she was a beautiful woman. And I would just imagine her in front of, the troops with her dress on and flowers in her hair. And I wanted to be just like her. I wanted to be a singer just like her. But I wasn't sure I wanted to be a jazz musician, just because back then I couldn't see myself conjuring up all those crazy improv solos like the way, Coltrane did, or Charlie Parker, the Bird. I couldn't wrap my brain around all those crazy chord progressions and altered scales, and it was very overwhelming for me, very scary. So it wasn't until much later in life that I began, kind of playing through some of that stuff by ear, and somehow my fingers just seemed to know what notes to play, and sometimes they played the wrong notes. A lot of times they played the wrong notes. But, you know, I started I started trying to break down the music, you know, and play through the chords, play through the scales, and it kind of, after a while, I kind of picked it up. And so I was relying on my ears and on some minimal knowledge of jazz chordal progressions and jazz improvisations. So also, as a child, my first love was actually classical music, and jazz didn't make sense to me. It just broke all the rules in the book for me as a classical musician. So I never wanted to be an orchestral flautist. I just, thought that was too structured and inhibiting and conforming. So I did like the freedom of jazz and being able to compose and create on the spot like that, but it was very challenging for a long time. So, but I mean, as a classical flautist, I really did enjoy that. I was usually at the top of my league with that, or at least second chair. I was very, very accurate in my approach to classical music. And I have to thank for that my teacher at LOXA, Diane Allen Craig, who was the co-principal of the Philharmonic, the LA Philharmonic at the time. So she taught me a lot about passion, but a lot about, precision and accuracy with music as well. So, so I always felt like, I was just interpreting someone else's creativity when I played classical music. And I didn't want that. I wanted to be able to create my own, music through what was being given to me. And jazz provided the platform for that. So I approached jazz first as a vocalist. Um, one year for my birthday, my mom gave me this microphone toy, and it was horrible. It had an amplified speaker and terrible reverb, and it came with a cassette tape with popular, jazz tracks on it, Broadway stuff like New York, New York, and Memories, and uh, the A side had the lead vocals, and then like the B side had just the karaoke track. So yeah, I literally played the hell out of that thing. I just wore that thing out. But I got to where, using that, I got to where I was singing along, you know, to cassette tapes with the stereo that I had at the time, to real jazz standards, stuff, by Nina Simone, Dinah Washington, Ella Fitzgerald, Billie Holiday, Frank Sinatra, these people, I I sang as probably about as much as I would practice the flute, which was like roughly 4 hours a day, almost every day. In fact, my neighbor next door, my mother confirmed this later, but I found out that the neighbor next door was actually listening in when I was practicing, and he was in a wheelchair, and he was probably retired military, and he would sit out on his back porch or the side porch, and either right inside or outside the door. And I would have my window open, and my window was about 6 or 7 feet away from his door. So I didn't know that he was listening. But when my mom told me that he was listening in, I became very self-conscious about it. So if I heard him out there, I would immediately go and shut the window. I left the window open because God knows we didn't have air conditioning, where we lived. So yeah, I grew up on Brewster Street in the city of Linwood. But I would shut that window, and I didn't want an audience, and I just felt like it was such an intrusion, and I was so embarrassed. I didn't want him to listen to me. But anyway, I mean, I kind of got over that, but I would literally practice for hours, so I don't blame him. I mean, like, he got some free concerts, definitely. And when I was not able to practice, when it was time for me to put my flute away or stop singing, of course I'd stop singing, but when I wasn't able to practice anymore because my mother had told me, look, it's bedtime, you need to go to bed, I'd say, okay, Mom, and then I'd sneak my flute back out once everyone had gone to sleep. I'd put it back together, and I had a little flashlight, and I'd hold it kind of upright, in my lap, and I'd finger the notes on the page. And I would do that until I was done practicing, until I had mastered the passage that I was working at. Because with the flute, if you kind of just finger the keys, you can produce a very faint sound, a very faint tone, with just a little light blowing through the hole there, through the mouthpiece. And so that's what I did. And, that kind of actually made the difference between me being able to play through rehearsal the next day or not. So